Hello and welcome to this episode of Unscripted. I am joined now by Joe Colangelo, who is the co-founder and CEO of Bear Analytics. Joe, I hope I've got that right. Joe and I met in a kind of curious way. We've got a mutual acquaintance, and I was amazed at what Bear Analytics are doing. I thought I was the only crazy person in this market trying to go analytics and data first, but you guys are there already. I just feel like with these unscripted podcasts around events, it's so cool to have people who are in the field sharing their stories. So welcome to this podcast, Joe. Glad you're here.
No, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. I find that this is exciting for me when the universe puts these collisions together and we had an opportunity to meet. And just to reinforce what you said, I absolutely think what we're trying to do is also crazy.
Good. Well, in this podcast, you're going to hear two crazy people talking about tech. So get ready, guys. Get ready. Joe, when we were preparing for this, you and I were talking about the role of AI in events in particular. And there's a lot of hype around it, for sure. And it's been climbing and climbing and climbing. But the hype is real, isn't it, Joe? Because some of the stuff, I was looking at Google's conference and I was listening to some of the sessions. Some of the stuff is amazing. I mean, they've got a token window that'll take an entire hour's worth of video. It's crazy. And you're already playing with AI as we are as well. So can you just sort of take it away in terms of some of the use cases that you're already trying to put into action?
Yeah, so it's funny you bring that up. So at one, the hype is real. And you can argue then if the hype is real, is it still hype? Well, we can go back to that question later. But in terms of that Google model, I was fortunate enough to get some early access to that Gemini 1.5, that million token, add a book, add a video model. And I'll give you just one example of what I used it for, real practical example. We looked at our internal CRM and we were trying to take the open field job titles that people had entered, if they had subscribed to our newsletter, if we met them at a conference, all the things. And I said, I want to do two things with it. I want to put it in a job level and I want to put it in a job role. Are you a marketing person, audience acquisition, sales, what have you? It took me about 90 minutes to go through tens of thousands of people, writing a really simple prompt, and then going through and actually kind of running it through a second time. The mechanism by which we used to do this internally and externally for clients as recently as 2 or 3 years ago was a lot more laborious, couldn't be done by just a single person, oftentimes required a lot of education and kind of filtering based on the industry or the kind of sub vertical that you were looking at. So this stuff it's nothing short of incredible, and it's only getting better.
And that's the craziness about it. I mean, when different use case, also playing with the same model, we put in an entire webinar and asked to pull out the context of it, how it lands within the entire framework and so on. And yeah, you're right. That job could have been done with other machine learning models, but what these models allow you to do is just the ease. You pointed to it as well. You put in a prompt, you say, categorize this from that into that and that and that, and it does it so fast. And what was your accuracy? Because I found the output from Gemini, not only was it pretty accurate, but I like the way it renders speech. I think it's better.
So we've learned a couple of techniques along the way. One of the ones that I always recommend to folks when you're generating prompts is something called few shot prompting. And if you haven't done this before, basically what it is you type in your prompt. So let's say I want to say, let's go to that job title example, CTO, CSO, CIO, they all equal C-suite, right? And then I will also then put in a number of examples below it that says CEO equals Chief Executive Officer equals C.E.O. And so you actually add just a couple of examples. And when these large language models, Gemini or other, look at these examples or a few shots in the prompt, their accuracy and efficiency rapidly improves. And Microsoft is pushing a lot of this on the OpenAI front. So it does work across LLMs. It's not just a Gemini thing or not just a ChatGPT or an OpenAI thing. And that really just increases the accuracy for us. And then another little trick I use is I always add like a little catch-all. So you never know, an LLM will force a match. And so some folks, they might say, hey, that's a hallucination or it doesn't make sense. And so what I do is I give it an off-ramp. And I say, and if it doesn't look like it should match these 5 or 6 job roles, just dump it into other. Exactly. And then I go and I rewrite the prompt for the other category when I see my results.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the pace of change, it's phenomenal as well. And like you said, these things are only going to get better. But I want to go on to my next thing. And I think a lot of industries are doing this. It's not just the events industry. People are saying, oh my God, how do I use this? And can I put it in? Will it solve all of this? There is still an underlying issue, which is around data. You need, if you're going to activate, and it's not, all AI isn't the same. You've got machine learning models, you've got regression models. That's a different kind of AI. I think could maybe subject for another podcast. If you really want to activate this, it goes back to thinking about the data strategy you need to activate it, to get the underlying foundations right. You know, you can actually use the LLMs to clean your data a little bit, but you still need a core of a data strategy. You need to get it right, don't you?
Yeah. So if you think about an off-the-shelf LLM as being like a student, they would be a master linguist and would earn A pluses across the board. And then you would go and throw them into a math classroom and they actually wouldn't be the best student, probably a middle of the road kind of, C plus B minus. And so what we're finding is if you take it, and this is, an off the shelf LLM, no pre-training, nothing like that, and you just ask it to do kind of some simple math problems, you start to see what we would call a hallucination. Basic math or basic word problems don't get answered. And all of a sudden, it feels like the magic or the genius gets stripped away. And so coming back to your point, Adam, you're exactly right. You need to think about where the strength currently lies. Again, subject to change a year from now, but where we are right now, you really have to do a great job of contextualizing the numbers that you're feeding into the LLM. In some cases, you actually need to do the math for the LLM and then add the context of what was done. And then it'll go through and explain it and put it into word form, maybe build a chart, build a table the way that you want it to. And you will feel that magic come back. It just doesn't have it yet on the math front.
You segue quite neatly into the next point, which when you go onto the forums where people are talking about all of this, and if you're playing around like I have, and you say to people, you need to train this stuff. And when you say it to the uninitiated, they are thinking about prompts. It's not about prompts. Training an LLM is something completely different. You're giving it intelligence and information it doesn't have before, right? And that in itself is still a little bit of an art.
Yeah, so I would agree with that statement. All of these LLMs, and I think ChatGPT is probably still like the Coca-Cola of LLMs, if you will. If you have your free or paid ChatGPT account and you go in, it's going to have a cutoff date for when the training, what it's been trained up to. And it's going to be generally trained. But if you're trying to develop a product or a platform or any type of specialization, you're more than likely going to have to see yourself going down the path of inserting a vector database. And the easiest way to think about this is a vector database is a way to create memories. And that's why when you are in some platforms and they provide you an LLM generated, output, they're going to give you maybe a little thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if the response looks good and you give it a thumbs up, what happens in layman's terms is it goes in and it says, the logic that was used and where that response was pulled from in our memory, this vector database, aligned with what the end user wanted to see. And so then you get a reaffirmation. And then if it was a negative, then it goes back and it tries to recompute how it would put it together. And over time, you then get this training. Now that's like end user training. Of course, there's ways that development teams can go in and kind of force some of the trainings, but off the shelf, especially on the language or the linguistic side, a lot of these LLMs are like unbelievably performant. But on the data side, you're still going to need some training.
And that is kind of important that you don't just turn on AI and it solves your problem. You really have to think about it, and then you've got to line it up. So if you have the world of your traditional conference producer where you research the market and you put it all together, and then you have your expert speakers and so on, it would be awesome to have an LLM working alongside that person, which would also be over time more and more market knowledgeable, so you can get better and better content production. But you need to train it, right? Because the LLM on its own knows absolutely nothing, say, about telehealth, if that's where you're working. And is that some of the stuff where you think we could get some super use cases for our domain, our industry?
100%. And so here's the area I think is probably, using your example, the greatest opportunity. So let's say, for example, you're running an event and, you have a relatively famous speaker, like a Tim Ferriss, someone who's out there where there's domain expertise on what they're talking about, or like a Scott Galloway, right? The LLM is going to be able to pull from a repository because those individuals have quite a bit of content out there in the marketplace. But I think one of the advantages that organizers have with their existing content base is that they can feed in the exact transcripts, words. Even now, when you start to think about the imagery and the content that you're able to consume, the actual PowerPoint slides, to be more direct, from the session, from this year's event, from the next time that person or a group of people speak together. And now you can start to build a proprietary, I hate to use the term database, it's more of like a proprietary knowledge store that you can query against. And also, you may want to flip that on its head, that your prospective audience or future audience can query against to get an understanding on what those individuals will talk about or have talked about in the past. And I'll add one more piece to that the organizer has the advantage of. They're also going to be able to layer in the speaker scores, for lack of a better term. So imagine if you're putting a program together, maybe we're going to look at a different individual to fill this speaking slot that we have, instead of just going through the same Rolodex time and time again.
Because it's always been one of those things. I mean, it's a natural progression, but every organizer, in the beginning, we had all these presentations at the thing, and then it became easier to record them. It started with screen recording. Now you've got video. So every organizer has this huge archive of multimedia data, domain-specific multimedia data, and it's been, I've seen very few people who've turned that into business value, whether that's commercialized or whatever it is, but some form of business value. It normally ends up being some sort of dumb download portal, right? Click, click, click. You can download this. With the advancements of Gen AI and its ability to recognize and even decode an entire video, we suddenly are on the cusp of creating value in a very different way there.
Yeah, because it was before, when you're talking about that download portal, it's because the deliverable was binary. It was either recording, no recording. And it can only be moved in this giant chunk of all or nothing. And then you could argue, okay, maybe there was kind of a half measure there, closed captioning, or maybe with some high levels of editing, you can break it into like snippets, right? You can make it YouTubeable or TikTokable in there, but it required a lot of time and energy without a clear commercialization or value path. Maybe they do the keynote, but surely not the other 300 sessions. Now with these LLMs, holy smokes, right? It's possible. It's quick. I still think that the path to monetization, that's not bulletproof yet, right? It's not very clear, but now the cost and the time investment has come way down. And you can actually look for patterns, and people are notoriously terrible. These things are legit at looking and assembling patterns. They are built for it. And so you have an additional superpower there that you didn't previously have before.
Yeah, 100%. And if you do, you can marry it all up. And suddenly the outcome is making your events become hugely more relevant as well. I was also interested you were in our prep, you shared with me another story, which I think is the point of these podcasts, to bring these stories to life, which demonstrate value. You were saying that you'd done a POC on taking the attendance data at an event, then using that to profile the attendees to then, actually, I'll let you talk about it. Why am I telling your story, Joe? It's your story. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is, I believe, simple in theory and has been notoriously challenging in execution before these LLMs really became as powerful and as scalable as they are. So, we work with a lot of trade associations, professional societies, for-profit event producers. They spend an enormous amount of time and energy to get the right content coming from the right voices in front of the right people. That's really what we're talking about here. And so you have to get these concentric circles in place. And one of the things that has always impressed me by folks on the content side is it's always this game of chicken. You need to have something that is both timely, but also early enough that you can take advantage of it in the audience acquisition marketing cycle. And so you're trying to skate a little bit to where the puck's going, and you're trying to do it at a massive scale, 100, 500, 1,000 different, sessions, keynotes, trainings, what have you. And now there's the opportunity where we can map who physically shows up in the space, what maybe 5, 6, 12 kind of demographic or metadata defines those individuals. And now we can actually quantify the type of content, the tags on that content very quickly, very repeatedly. And we can then start to sprinkle, if you will, those flags on an individual profile, so that if you're doing anything else content related, and it doesn't have to be just the next event, it could be the white paper that you're releasing the following week, it could be the webinar that you're having next month, you'll easily be able to say, I'm looking for individuals who have shown, paid with the currency of real money or real time or both, an interest in the following areas: analytics, AI, and events. Joe's name pops up. And now all of a sudden, I'm able to actually be put in a cohort of my peers. But more than that, you can actually then, for example, go and take the future program or the future white paper and say, Dear Joe, here's what's coming up at XYZ event in 2025. We think these 5 sessions mean the most to you. And so you have data working on both ends. It's both informative, and you can use it in a predictive manner to tailor the messaging. This is something that, we've been asked this question for 15 years, and these LLMs finally help to unlock the hardest part of it.
Yeah, because it's always been my bugbear when I was organizing events as well. And I was doing crazy stuff in spreadsheets because that was the only way you could do some of this stuff at the time. But I always made the point that the structured data probably has the least relevant information, because just because someone is a CMO, it does not mean they're always looking for a new marketing automation piece of software. They're not, right? It's their behavior on your website. And one of the things that we're looking at, to your point, is I think GA4 is hugely underutilized by the events industry, because you can now pull all the raw data into BigQuery. You tie it up correctly. What you've described in terms of the on-site behavior can be married back to the online behavior and even the webinar behavior. And now you have the potential of creating this matrix, and you still have to put some structure to it, and this is the thing that you were saying earlier on, that you need a data strategy, but you tag all of that up. It allows you to become way more personalized, because personalization in live events has been severely lacking because the data doesn't flow.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, it's still not there where I can just click a button and everything will just work. There's still quite a bit of data strategy that's involved, but it's for the first time actually possible.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, the previous state of the art, which you well articulated, is spreadsheet gymnastics. And there was no way that you were actually going to get to what we're talking about with an individual or group of individuals trying to do that stuff in a spreadsheet. So there's an accessibility that these tools unlock that I still think we're just scraping the surface on right now.
Do you think that if you and I were to like future gaze a little bit, I mean, the pace of this change is crazy. It was a year ago when people were like going, oh, wow, the token window is X. And for anybody listening, the token window is can be equated to the memory of the conversation, right? And X was pretty tiny. And now you can put an entire video file into it. That's insane.
I mean, we went from basically 8K to 1 million tokens.
That's like going from a ZX80 to a modern laptop in 8 months.
There's the tool sets themselves that are accelerating, but there's also this, I think there's acceleration on multiple fronts, and that's what's really leading to this hyperscale growth, because it's not just going back to your kind of PC to laptop, the hardware evolution. That started as a very few groups of people moving, quote unquote, pretty quickly. But here you have not just the software and the hardware experts, you have the capital allocators moving as quickly as possible. And you also have, you could argue, customers willing to adopt maybe faster than any tool set technology in history. And so you have the sell side, the buy side, and all the facilitators of both moving in sync
at the same pace,
non-linear ways.
When we look at that, I mean, it's incredibly fascinating. It's amazing to be part of, as much as it can be scary as well, if you look at it from another perspective. The thing that I find so amazing about all of this is because the other thing that happens with a lot of organizers is there is no homogenized data structure, but you can get much closer to it, right, with this. Every registration form has got 10 batshit questions that no one knows why they're on there, but we can actually now start activating data in a much better way without having this friction between, oh, we can't remove that because this is what the sponsor wants. And we can just be smarter now, right?
So there's two ways to look at that. And I'll tell you where I fall on the reg form discussion, because I know lately it's gotten a lot of heat, at least in my LinkedIn thread. You can go ahead and say, well, we're going to be maybe there's one camp that is barrier reduction. So let's eliminate questions. Let's make it a 1 or 2 page reg form. And the goal is to get to payment as quickly as possible. Kind of like an e-commerce-esque type mindset. And you can certainly see the validity in that in the other areas where that has been successful. The other camp is live events are or I should say events in general, but especially live events are a fantastic way to get first party data that is going to be accurate, because people don't generally screw up their job title when they're typing it in real time.
Because it's on
the company
badge, right?
They work for.
You're walking around with it.
The company they work for, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a terrific data collection opportunity. But maybe we haven't been good stewards of our clients, customers, attendees, and registrants with that user experience, or actually what we do with the data. And I'll be pretty direct. I fall in the second camp. I think we should be collecting and updating data at that point in time. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to do it. And I think if you bypass it to save a couple pages on the reg form, I think not a particularly compelling one. And here's why. Because us as humans have proven time and time again that we will gladly hand over our information if you dazzle us on the experience. The experience side, to your point, has been waning, or maybe has not been delivered upon.
Well, look, that is my point on it, right? If it's a transaction, and whenever I consult with clients, every data point is a value exchange. And if you're going to ask it, give me something back. And if you're not giving me something back because you're just going to ask it, shove it into, let's say, some app where I'm going to get bombarded by people trying to sell me stuff, which is legitimate. You're at a trade show, but the experience is not great. And I agree with you. Like, ask the question, but have a duty of care to use those questions to reward me with an experience that justifies me giving you those answers beyond the
100%.
Yeah.
Because if you had a line after a 5 or 6 page reg form that said, sorry, we had to ask you so many questions, but we use this data to improve your pre-event and on-site experience. And here's how we do it. And you started saying, and actually delivering, so maybe not just saying, but delivering on things like, we're going to accelerate your discovery of content. We're going to accelerate your discovery because you told us you're at this event to meet meaningful partners in this area. And here are the top dozen or 2 dozen that you should see on the show floor. Then I think people would come hand in hand and gladly give you their information, understand the why behind the level of rigor that is involved, but it's just not there yet. If the question is, can AI help to, and large language models in particular, help to accelerate those things? I think yes. Is that being done in the active wild right now? To the best of my knowledge, not yet.
I think, looking at the time, that is probably a beautiful place to end this podcast and leave people wanting more. I've enjoyed this conversation. I think it's given, well, I certainly feel, I hope so, I hope it has, it's crystallized the value AI can bring. I see too many commentators where they're like going, oh, you have to use it, without articulating the why. If you had your way now and an event organizer came, listen, Joe, just go nuts, do what you think is right, what would you be doing as a final word on this podcast?
So I have a blank check in both scope and scale of where we would be pointing AI.
Yep.
I'd jump right to the end and I would say, can we take, and with the data that's currently being collected through the existing platforms, no kind of innovation required in those areas, and can we create unique attendee journeys that are akin to when you go to the museum and you put like your headset on and it explains to you about the different exhibits and things like that? The delivery would probably be through your phone, and you would be able to not just wayfind, but truly have, like, today I want to look for new business partners. You click it and it outlines for you your itinerary. Think about the power of that for a first-time attendee at a more of a trade show type environment where you have a big space, a lot of experiences to be discovered. Think of what the organizer does to get those first-timer lounges, and how many first-timers never go there because it's undiscovered. I think given a blank anything, I'd probably jump right in and go after that.
Awesome. Joe, you've got to do it. Sounds cool, right?
I got this day job that's holding me back.
Yeah, that's the trouble. The day job and then tinkering on the side. It's a conundrum. But listen, Joe, it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you ever so much for making the time. And thank you all for listening as well.
Thanks, Adam. Love what you do, man.